Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name is Dan Lizette. This is episode 145. How's everybody doing? Welcome back. Thanks for coming back and taking another listen. And when I'm at the thank yous, I really want to give a thank you to all of you who listened and checked out last week's episode. It was my first solo episode in a very, 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 very long time. Now, super hardcore fans of the Podcast Digest, if such a thing exists, would know that this was not actually the first time I've done this. In fact, what you guys heard last week was sort of what I started out doing. In fact, my first 18 episodes of this show, with one exception, was just me recording a solo episode. So if you really want some old, funny, hilarious type only Dan recording, go all the way back to the beginning, folks. Episodes 1 through 18. That was primarily what I was doing, but brought that back last week and sort of explained everything that's happening with the show, and I got great response. Once again, all you guys rose to the occasion. I got a couple more Patreon supporters, a number of new emails, DMs on Twitter, and I really appreciate the rallying and the support of the Podcast Digest community. It's been really humbling to see, and I thank all of you so much. So, as you already know, as this episode's already dropped in your feed and you read the title, I'm back with another rerun, or as I call them, flashback episode. And I decided to go to the other end of the spectrum for this week's show. The last time I did a flashback, which was episode 142, I went with one of the biggest guests I've ever had, which was Roman Mars. Everybody knows who he is, and so on and so forth. So this time I wanted to spotlight in a truly independent production. And I went back to my catalog because I have had many, many independent podcast hosts as guests and love talking to those folks. And I went all the way back and decided to feature this week for a flashback episode two guests that I had that I talked to a very long time ago. In fact, they were guests on my show all the way back on episode 47 from July of 2015. So this conversation is almost 2 years old. Jason Parsons and Grant Markham, co-hosts of 7 Days of Geek, and a number of other shows, some that are no longer with us, had retired themselves, or others that have been sort of stopped and restarted, and new seasons, and some that have continued all along. But Jason and Grant are two of the coolest independent podcasters I've ever met. Nice guys, great people, wonderful supporters of what I've done here on the Podcast Digest. And for years, they've literally been a huge help to me. And so when I decided to dig back into the back catalog and feature a previously published episode, or flashback as I'm calling them, I really wanted all of the new people who are just now tuning into the Podcast Digest, or you have in the last year and a half or so, to make sure that you hear this conversation. So if you've already heard it, it's the same conversation from July of 2015. If you haven't heard it or came on board a little late, stick around. Jason and Grant are great guests. We had a great conversation, and I think you'll see why I recommend their shows to you very highly if you're looking for something new to add to your subscription list. So if all goes according to plan, folks, I will have a brand new episode for you next week. I've got it scheduled for this upcoming week, so assuming nothing with the scheduling gods bites me, I will have that recorded, edited, and published for you next week for episode 146. So hopefully the return of a brand new long-form interview on the Podcast Digest. So, but until then, please enjoy this awesome conversation. Jason Parsons, Grant Markham from 7 Days of Geek, Podcasting 101, Stranger Conversations, and on and on and on with the folks, the shows these guys have done. So enjoy. And folks, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette, and as I mentioned up front, I've got several different shows to be talking about tonight because I've got two hosts and co-hosts joining me. I'd like to welcome Jason Parsons and Grant Markham from 7 Days of Geek, Stranger Conversation, Podcasting 101, all kinds of great shows. Gentlemen, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man.
Well, it's great to have you both at the same time because there are so many different things that we can talk about with all the great shows that you guys are producing, hosting, have in your past. You guys have been passionate independent podcasters for a very long time, and I wanted to talk about some of the great stuff that you're you're doing. There's so many different places to start, but let's start maybe with the first of all of these shows that I found and I started listening to. And Jason, that is Podcasting 101. Can you tell anybody who's listening to the show that hasn't heard about that show what it is you do there?
In a short, the consensus is we discuss all things podcasting, recording, producing, show notes, interviews. We talk a lot about whether you can make money or not. We cover everything on that show, just a little bit of everything. And the interview is always different because I try to gear it based on the genre of podcast. So there's different types of hosts doing different types of things. And I hope for people to learn how to podcast in different ways that can work for them. Listening to the show.
And that show's been around for a bit, correct?
We just celebrated 2 years.
Nice.
Right?
Nice.
Yeah, 2 years.
Approximately how many episodes are you in now on that one?
I think 60, 65, maybe somewhere around there.
And what do you think the target audience is for that? Is this for folks just starting out, folks looking to refine their show, folks just wanting to learn more about the industry?
It started out for folks who wanted to learn how to podcast. It's become a little bit of all three of those. There's a lot of people who listen just to see who the next guest is so they can see if it's a podcast they'd be interested in listening to. I by design, I never thought that would happen. It never even crossed my mind. And I hear from people all the time that just enjoy the show who have no interest in podcasting, but just have interest in finding new shows to listen to.
Yeah, and there's been a couple that you've had that I have found in for the Podcast Digest. I'm always looking to find new things, and that is one of the things I've gotten out of 101 as well, is finding those type of things. Where do you think, moving forward, that you would like to take the show? Would you want to do more of that type of thing? What after these 2 years and 60-plus episodes, have you not gotten to that you'd like to do with the show?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I don't know what I've not gotten to until I've gotten to it. Yeah, I mean, there's always something. Even I'm always learning something because someone always has a new trick or, something they've done, or they've been podcasting for a long time. It's just either I'm a fan of a show and I have them on, or I have them on because they know something about podcasting, or they just a specific genre speaks to me. So I can always learn from something from them as well.
And Grant, I want to bring you on as well because you are also now.
Hi, Grant.
Hi, Grant. You are also now a solo podcast host, if you will. And I know that you haven't been around as long as Podcasting 101. You are probably, 19 or 20 episodes in at this point?
I just recorded my 20th episode this past Tuesday.
And that is of the excellent show Stranger Conversations. Folks who are not familiar with that, Grant, tell them about it.
The Stranger Conversations was something I conceived because I was at a turning point in life and I wanted to find myself. And I thought one of the ways I could probably do that is through finding people who have shared experiences in life, or even not having the same experiences, but learning of other people's experiences and how they dealt with certain things. And I thought initially the show was conceived where I would be kind of like a man on the street, and I would approach people and simply record conversations, and me trying to not only learn to be a better conversationalist, but a better listener. And so working through all the details and getting input from other people in the podcast community, I ended up with what I have now, which is simply I pick a stranger or someone who is relatively a stranger to me. So sometimes they're complete strangers, and sometimes they're people with whom I've heard of or had small conversations on Twitter with, and I simply call them up, and the listener is dropped directly into the conversation, and I don't do any kind of planning or preparation. Whatever preparation there is simply from any interaction, if at all, with the guest that I have on, and usually what ends up happening through just benign conversation is things will come out of that. So sometimes you really don't know as a listener where the show is going and what's going to happen, and you might not think after 15 or 20 minutes that it's really going to go anywhere. And so far to date, I don't believe that any guest has come on and it's just been flat the entire time. But the willingness and the openness of these complete strangers to share their life stories, their life experiences, always occurs. And then the other part, which the only, I guess, planned part of the show is the very last segment, which is the 10 questions, my 10 stranger questions. I ask the same 10 questions to every person that comes on the show. The questions were pulled from about 3,000 different questions that I had. And initially I had a completely different set of questions. And then the more I looked at them and the more I talked to other people in the community about them, I was looking for questions that would really help the listener learn even more about the guest that I hadn't been able to pull out or that they hadn't shared. And yeah, so that's really the premise of it. And my hope is that not only do I learn and grow, but that the listener has some sort of connection with this complete stranger. And really the idea is for all of us to step outside of our comfort zone, our bubble, and be more human and connect by sharing these stories and connect by sharing these experiences. And maybe somehow that'll make us better people. That's what I hope for me. I mean, if that happens to the listener, then I think I've succeeded as a podcaster. If it happens for me, which it often does, I feel like I'm succeeding and growing as a human being.
Absolutely. And the Stranger Conversations is very unique in its approach, folks. If you've not had a chance to check it out, I strongly encourage you to do so. It is a very different approach to what I do, which is like the interview show, the straight up interview show. Very, very different. It is literally a conversation and something worth checking out. But I wanted to talk about, you guys both struck, believe it or not, in two very different shows, what I'm going to call a common theme here, and that is sort of evolution of the show over time. I can really sympathize with that, which is why I think I'm plucking this as a theme, because I've also had evolution here in the Podcast Digest. Let's go back to you, Jason. And when you talk about Podcasting 101, that, it kind of went somewhere where you hadn't originally anticipated it. What was that change like? How do you think that arose? And how do you think it's working for you?
That's one of the things we talk about in this show is, and I've even talked to Grant when he was building his show. With the first 20 episodes, you don't expect, or you don't know what's going to change. And I've learned to expect that something is going to, through doing several different shows. I don't remember what the original question was, but it's sort of, go ahead. Tell me the question again.
About how the show had changed over time and how do you think that happened and how it's working for you?
I don't know. I don't know how it happens. I just tell people that it's going to. You set out to do one thing, and through listenership, through communication with other people, and through ideas of your own, your show just sort of evolves into its own beast. Do you find that to be true with yours?
Definitely, for sure. That's what happened to me, was more of my own personal desire for more. I think I aimed fairly low at first and then wanted more as I felt like I had, I don't want to say mastered, that I felt like I checked the box in a progression of, a show improvement scale, if you will. Right. So it was a lot of personal desire for more was my driving factor. With Stranger Conversations, Grant, how did this evolution happen with you?
Now explain evolution, like in what reference to the...
You mentioned that originally that you thought it could be kind of like a man on the street type thing. And I know you've talked about in several of the episodes about, the time length, and there were some changes there. So how did this all kind of come about, and how pleased or satisfied are you, through the process?
The man on the street idea died relatively quickly because I brought the idea to Jay, and Jay... For the listeners, Jay and I have been friends for 14
minutes.
10 for 10 years, 11 years? Jeez, I don't know anymore. We've been friends a very long time. Jay is my best friend. We've been podcasting since, we both started our podcasting career together, and we've been podcasting ever since in various...
2009.
Yeah, various outlets. So, he just looked at me and was like, "Yeah, you just don't have the confidence and the personality at this point to actually walk out on the street with a microphone and a recorder and just approach people." And that was really a reality check, because in fact it was true. And so I needed to develop a different way to still achieve what I wanted to, which was talking to complete strangers. You know what fascinated me? That everyone does this. it's a quiet drive on the way to work, or you're headed somewhere. Maybe you're going for a walk or a jog, and you see somebody, and it's happened to everybody, and you wonder in your head who they are, what's their story. And so I was driving to work back and forth, and I would see the same person over and over. And it dawned on me that, man, I'd really like to know more about this person. What's that, Jay?
You said you saw the person over and over. I said, maybe that person's dead.
No, I just mean walking down the street at the same time. But and it fascinated me, the thought that I could maybe start talking to people I didn't know and find out what's their story. And then it was, how can their story help me? How can their story give me new perspective and new meaning in my own life? And then it was, well, if I can get them to talk to me, and if I can give them a platform where there's no opinions or opinionated, I guess, judgments. I mean, certainly I have differing opinions than some of my guests, but I don't ever attack them, and I certainly would never judge them. That the listeners then would vicariously through the program and me get the same experience, the same response, I guess. And so that's where the show is 20 episodes in. But as you're well aware, Dan, because you've received some of the emails where I send out asking questions and just trying to get a better feel for where my show's at with professional or I guess better podcasters. I don't know what word you want to use here, Dan. But I think my show is still going to evolve more. In September, I'm going to Rose City Comic-Con in Portland, Oregon with Jason.
There you go.
And a bevy of other podcasters. And that is actually going to be the first time that I do attempt the man on the street with a microphone and a recorder, predominantly because I'm going to have what I consider a large group of friends around me. So maybe my anxiety will be curbed a little bit. But so
I think if I can speak for you, I think a lot of the evolution with your podcast happened beforehand. You were in no rush to put your show out, and I think you did a smart thing. It's one of the things I'm sure Dan has talked about, and I talk about on Podcasting One a lot, is take your time and really try to build your show. Yes, it's going to evolve, and you need to be prepared for that or be aware of things that you could change. But you were really smart in trying to find out what exactly you wanted to do with your show, and you built it slowly, and you really worked on everything that you wanted to do in the background before you ever even recorded.
Yeah, I guess I did, but I think that was part of like the obsessive compulsiveness and the anxiety of, putting something out and, failing from the start. But now I'm in the throes of like, okay, is my show good enough? And I do believe there are things about my show I need to change. One of the things we talked about pre-show was, Dan, I don't do an intro. And my thought process behind that has always been, okay, what if you just were sitting right next to two people having a conversation about something meaningful? Certainly you would listen in and to be very voyeuristic. And there you were, the fly on the wall. And for me, that's great. And I believe for the guest, it's great as well. I mean, there's a good banter and rapport. But I think for new listeners dropping in on any given episode, that might be a little problematic when all of a sudden, there's intro music and then bam, you're right in the middle of a conversation versus me doing a little bit of explaining. So that might be something that evolves once I find the right words to open my show with, I guess. But I don't know where else it's going to evolve beyond where it's at right now, because I did this for me, and I really am just kind of trying to share it with other people. I feel really blessed and lucky.
Well, I think you're doing a great job, and I think all of us, and I know I've heard, Jason, you talk about this on Podcasting 101, is that there is this idea of constant improvement, and there is this idea of, evolving and changing through whatever the driving force is, whether it's self-reflection, whether it's listener feedback, whether it's you just wanted something new to do something different for yourself, or whatever the case may be. And any exercise that any podcaster who's listening to this undertakes in that vein, I think, can only be effort well spent. I wanted to talk a little bit, because you alluded to it, Grant, when you gave your own, intro of Jason, which I probably should have. So thank you for that. About that history and this long history of podcasting and podcasting together that both of you had.
Oh, it's long.
I want to hear about episode 1, show 1, and what that road to launch that thing look like?
Jay, you want to take this one?
You mean episode 1 of Podcast the Motion Picture?
Sure. If that was the first one, I want to hear this story.
Oh, man.
Where do you want me to? You want to start with me going up to Grant at work and saying, "Hey, Grant, let's start a podcast," and Grant looking at me, "What the hell's a podcast?"
Start right there.
All right, that's what it was. I had found Kevin Smith started. I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan, and I used to read his blog. Was it My Boring Ass Live and then My Life? And he started doing a podcast, and I was like, "What is a podcast?" I asked the question too. So I went to iTunes, and maybe he had launched his second episode, but I'm pretty sure I caught him right there on the first or second. And I started listening, and I immediately would search iTunes for, because I'm obsessed with movies, and so is Grant. I would look for movie podcast and anything I could find, and I would just start listening to all these little independent guys making their own podcasts, and that probably lasted a few weeks. I'd walk around work and everyone would get mad at me because I had earbuds in my ears. I never heard them. Grant would yell at me all the time because he could never have a conversation with me. So that's when I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to have a radio show. Like as a kid, I always thought it'd be cool just to talk into a microphone and have a radio show. So I went up to Grant and said, "Hey, let's start a podcast." So that started off us down the road of course, with all we did at work and all we still do at work is just talk about movies, movies we've watched, movies we want to see, news about a movie that's going to happen, and we cast it, just anything. So that's what we turned our show into. So not knowing anything about podcasting, I went to the library and I got Podcasting for Dummies and The Idiot's Guide to Podcasting.
Oh my God, that's right.
Yeah. And I read one in one night. And the next day I brought it to work and I'm like, "Grant, we're doing this. Here, you got to read this book." And he looked at me, he was like, "I'll tell you what, you read the book and you figure it out and I'll record with you." So I went home, I read Podcasting for Dummies next, and I knew we needed a microphone. Libsyn was already around, so I think they must have been mentioned in there. So I just went to Libsyn and we created an account, and we really didn't have much of a formula, I don't think. We knew we wanted to talk like trailers that we saw in the movie, and the whole deal was we would go see a movie and then come home and discuss it.
No, it wasn't Libsyn. It wasn't Libsyn, right?
Yes, it was Libsyn.
You can still look up Podcast the Motion Picture and see the episodes, but you can't get the files, right?
Right. And that's some other like Podcast Alley company that just happened to grab them and hold them. But because the RSS feed is down, you can't listen to the episodes. But we use Libsyn.
One of the things I want to interject with in this little story that Jay's telling is I moved to Grand Rapids at 28 or 29, just married, had no friends. I had to quit my job in Lansing, and I got a job at Best Buy working in the media department, which is at the time when CDs were all the rage and digital subscriptions were just coming out and people could buy DVDs and whatnot. That's what we did. We sold DVDs and movies and CDs to customers. But that's how Jay and I met. And literally, we would spend 90% of our shift together, hanging out, walking up and down the aisles, not selling shit to anybody. And we found this, this common affinity for entertainment, our love for it. And
come to ask for a DVD. Well, what's this movie with this one person? And Grant and I would battle of who could figure it out first.
Yeah, with the least amount of details. That was the big thing. Like the least amount of details, and whoever got it won. That was always the winner. But that's how our friendship really started all those years ago. So, and then the podcasting idea came about.
So you guys read these books, get these microphones, sign up with Libsyn, and make this first recording. What was that like? What did you guys think of it in the end? Did you feel like you were about to be superstars?
No, there was no microphones. We went to Radio Shack and we're looking for microphones, and there's this little desktop microphone in a box, and it was like an orange box, and on the side in big white letters it said podcasting. So I told Grant, "This must be the microphone. It says podcasting right on it."
Nice.
So we dropped down like $24.99 and went back to the house and plugged it into the USB port, and we re-recorded an episode. It was very strange at first. I think Grant,
we were about 2 inches from each other's face trying to talk into one microphone.
Yeah. And it was like talking into a tin can. The sound was terrible. And we had to lean in and lean out, and then the next one would lean in and lean out. And, we just try to have it's strange. I mean, you did this too, but you've been on microphone for years as a DJ, so it probably wasn't as strange to you. But, other than like the only microphone I ever talked into was like a telephone.
Right.
So leaning into this microphone and trying to have a conversation that, in the back of your mind, you're completely aware of every word is being recorded. So if you're an idiot, you're going to come off as an idiot. Now, I've grown over the years to realize that I'm an idiot, and I'm happy with everyone listening to that part of me. But it was a very, very, for me, it was a very, very strange thing to get used to. But instantly, it was an addiction.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that lasted 7 or 8 episodes.
I got to tell you, though, if I saw a microphone that said podcasting on it, I'd have to buy it.
Oh, yeah, they fooled me.
I mean,
what did we know? As a matter of fact, though, we drove. Do you remember this, Jay? We drove to Best Buy, looked at their microphones, drove to Radio Shack, looked at theirs, then went back to Best Buy, hemmed and hawed about getting a microphone there.
City stop in there as well.
There was. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But the Best Buy microphones didn't say podcasting on it. So.
Right. The same damn one, it was, but it was.
But that quickly led to us going when we went to the last podcaster standing was the crappy sound. I mean, and not everyone back there 7-8 years ago had great sound. So, but that was something that Grant was really a proponent of before I was. I was like, content. Let's just get stuff out there. Let's get good at it. We can always get equipment. And it quickly, that was the reason we went 5 episodes. Was like he's like, no, we need to do better than this. And that's when we sort of learned. You can buy a soundboard. You can get really good microphones and we figured if we were going to go at this, we were going to go at it right.
And that was my question is, how did the first one, the one that you said lasted 7 or 8 episodes, how did you guys come to the decision to retire it?
Because of the audio.
Yeah.
We both were enjoying what we were doing, but we knew that if we wanted to have any kind of an impact and we wanted to, I guess, put out the kind of show, we both had to agree to give each other what we both wanted. Jay was really consistent with content and building a show, and I really felt that audio was important because that people are spending their time listening to us. I didn't want it to sound like we were in a hollow tin can. I didn't want it to sound like it was cutting in and out all the time. And so yeah, we put a pin in it, if you will.
Right.
And I don't remember what the break was. It was a long time, the break between Podcast the Motion Picture and The Last Podcaster Standing. But when we started The Last Podcaster Standing, that was our lightning in the bottle moment, and that blew up. We were not prepared for the success that show had. We still actually, funny enough, we still use the exact same equipment today that we used back then.
Yep.
All right, so talk to me about the comeback. All right, Podcast the Motion Picture gets retired. You guys do some retooling from the hardware standpoint, and you come back with Last Podcaster Standing?
Yeah.
Yep.
What was the idea behind that show launch? So you guys are good on the equipment, and you start talking about what to do now. What was that conversation like?
I think one of the things we learned from Podcast the Motion Picture was formula was we needed to do something that we could hold ourselves to weekly. One of the things with the movie podcast we were doing was the formula was we go see a movie every week and sit home and talk about it. Now at the time I only had 2 kids and I think Grant had 1, but she was young and it was just difficult for us to always get out on a weekend, especially with the jobs that we had. We didn't work together at the time, and did we? Yeah, we did. Okay. But I was working 2 jobs. I was still working at another place. And so it was a little difficult to get out and see a movie. So when we went into The Last Podcaster Standing, one of the things was we, along with Tom and Joe, we would always have these strange, weird conversations, and we would always get dragged into each other's arguments. And we sort of decided to build it around there because that way it was always something that we could just have a conversation about and not be strictly beholden to something out there that we had to, come to the table with that one of us didn't do.
So to build on that, the premise came from Tom and I, one of the other hosts on Last Podcast Standing. We would have these repetitive, argumentative debates on any given subject matter, and then, like Jay said, we'd pull Joe and or Jay into it, or all 4 of us, and so we decided initially that it was going to be like this really heavy topic type argumentative debates, and then what ended up happening because of Jay's comedic timing and his ability to basically make anything funny, it started to evolve from his comedy and Joe's sarcastic wit. And so they started building more of the content idea, and I started building the equipment and the sound and the structure of how the podcast was going to be. And each of us took on a little bit of a different role of how, who was going to put what work into it. Tom was responsible for the web. He was responsible for all of the artwork. He would have story ideas. Jay really didn't bring stories. Jay's job was to essentially sit there, and then we would have all of the the news stories that we were going to talk about in a big pile, and we would pick and choose before an episode, and we would just riff on that in the opening of the show, and Jay would just knock it out of the park with his commentary, and the show evolved from that, and then it took on a life of its own.
So I need to ask this question, talking about the launch of Last Podcaster Standing, because I've heard you guys refer to this in each of your other shows in the past, and I'll admit I did not go back to listen to those, but I was curious. Was there a riff or inspiration on Last Comic Standing with the show title?
That is where I actually was pretty well responsible for the show title. I had written, and Jay's still mad at me to this day because I threw away, I think, the entire notebook from the inception of the show. But I had a whole page of titles. Yeah, a whole notebook. And because to me, that was like the thing that was going to brand us. Like we were on our way, celebrities. Yeah. And at the time, the Last Comic Standing rather was really big. It was taking off on NBC, and I thought, man, the Last Podcaster Standing. How awesome is that? Now, total tangent, segue, whatever it's.
I was just gonna go there.
Whatever it was supposed to be called. Fast forward to the future, towards the end, nearing the death of the Last Podcaster Standing. We actually got into a Twitter war back and forth in a comedic sense with two of the winners of the Last Comic Standing, because they in fact wanted to start a podcast called The Last Podcaster Standing, but we owned the name. And we ended up going to see John Reap. Is that thing got a Hemi? The comedian.
Right.
At the comic store that's
sold out, and he got us in.
Yeah, here in Grand Rapids, and he had a completely sold out show, and we were downstairs in the bar trying our hardest to get in. And when he found out who we were, and we got into the show, it was amazing. It was and we got to meet him afterwards. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
I thought there may have been some inspiration when I first heard, and I don't know on which show or which one of you had first mentioned it, but when I first heard the term Last Podcaster Standing, I figured it was either drawing inspiration off Last Comic Standing, or, and this thought came to my mind after hearing Grant with Stranger Conversations, they would literally just podcast for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, and the episodes would come out as like 7-hour marathons until the last one dropped. That was my thought.
It jokingly had like a second meaning, which was to see who could outdo each other, sort of. And Grant, I think it only lasted like 1 year, but I think the first year Grant had like said that I was the winner, because I would just go until whatever news story was, I would kill it, no matter what it was, how weird it was, how strange it was. It would just continue to go. So
Jay had a joke for everything, and he would throw as many of them at the wall, and whatever stuck. And when they did stick, they were great, and when they didn't, they were terrible. But there was always that line, and Jay made every effort to find the line.
There was no line.
And exactly, and that was one of the famous lines from one of the episodes was, we see a line and we just keep on going. I would be remiss at this point, if I can interrupt myself.
Don't be remiss.
To not mention that there was a fifth member of the Last Podcaster Standing. She joined us on the 20th episode and continued to be a cast member until the very end, and that is Stephanie, also known as the Google Goddess.
And how many episodes did Last Podcaster Standing go?
76.
76. And what was the story behind its retirement?
Oh boy, you got another show hour here.
I'll sum it up. I think I do the best job at that. The simple fact is there was too many chefs in the kitchen. There was a lot of differentiating ideas. I was changing as a person, and so the content that we were putting out
evolving.
What's that?
I said you're ever evolving.
I'm just saying I essentially, the content that we were putting out, I was becoming less and less comfortable with. It was very adult-oriented, sexually graphic, and not that I'm against any of that stuff. It's just that wasn't the type of entertainment I wanted to do anymore. At the same time, another cast member was being forced into retirement from his personal life. And so the show was just taking a downward spiral, and we all just agreed to hang it up at that point. And frankly, even though we were never famous or pro podcasters, I think we went out on top. I can tell you without a doubt that if you listen to all 76 episodes, you'll learn a little bit about everybody, but you will pretty much learn everything there is to learn about Jason and I. It certainly tells our story. And if you listen in order, which there's a couple of people who have done that over the past couple of months, and we've gotten a lot of feedback, which is nice. But it's basically plays out like a rise and fall of a VH1 behind the scenes.
Yeah. We actually on the 7 Days of Geek, we did a 117, I believe was the number. We talked for about an hour in depth behind the scenes stuff and how the show, it wasn't like every once in a while we just go back to it. I mean, it's called The Last Podcaster Standing. It still deserves to be that because it just won't die. We just can't let that show go.
So the retirement of Last Podcaster Standing, was that the on-ramp to 7 Days of Geek?
Yes, it was. Well, yes. Unintentionally it was. I was going to, when I started 7 Days of Geek, there were things happening in the background. I wasn't quite sure that TLPS was going to end, but one of the things that I wasn't on TLPS was my very, very geeky side. I mean, there's definitely me in that, but I didn't get to have that all the time because a couple of the other co-hosts they just weren't that type of people or to have that type of conversation. So 7 Days of Geek was sort of brought out in order to do that side, to be a different type of podcast. And then as that was coming out within a mere 3 episodes, I think, TLPS died and 7 Days of Geek carried on.
And this is still active today. How many episodes and counting?
Oh, God, we just recorded 121 last night, but it's not the 121st episode. It's actually the 195th episode.
Okay, explain.
We do a 30 days of podcasting. So there's been episodes 2 years in a row. So there's 60 episodes. We do interviews that we call the Spotlight. And then there have been a few other special things too. So there's a weekly episode number and then anything else extra or special we do. I usually don't number those.
Gotcha. And
Spotlights are awesome, by the way.
Right. Well, that's where I was going next. Anybody who is not familiar with 7 Days of Geek, who wants to give them a rundown of what they can find if they are hitting the subscribe button right now for that?
Tell them, Grant.
When you're listening to 7 Days of Geek, you're going to get Jason and I and Bacon and Jeremy and Oz, especially in the earlier episodes, all waxing philosophic on entertainment news, movies, trailers, TV, comic books, cartoons, just pop culture geekiness, nerdiness. As the show has progressed, some of the front players have dropped off a little bit because of life responsibilities, and it's usually Jay, myself, and Jeremy, and occasionally Bacon and Oz will pop in and out of any given show. And actually Oz does side projects with Jason. That's really funny. We do a lot of little side projects for 7 Days of Geek. We've done radio plays. We've done Action 7 news series, those kind of things that all play in under the 7 Days of Geek banner. But when you're listening to 7 Days of Geek, you're going to get all basically the pop culture news, what's going on, our opinions on it. And usually it's not very like prim and proper and pretentious. It's really just us geeking out and everyone else listening to it. You know, that's what you're going to hear. My favorite part of the show is the episodes where we have landed a celebrity, and by celebrity, I mean a celebrity, and they agree to come on the show. And then we get to talk to them like they're normal human beings. Again, it's not a pretentious type of conversation or interview. It's just you're sitting down. You know, it's not like they're making their rounds on the red.
No, we don't want that at all.
No, so we don't ask like the same formulaic questions. I mean, certainly they're thrown in there, I think, occasionally. But we've had the luxury of talking to Christopher Kubasik, who was responsible for writing a lot of role-playing games in the late 80s, early 90s. He was also responsible for the Hulu exclusive series with Xander Berkeley called The Booth at the End. We've talked to Christopher Leone, who just wrapped Parallels, which is a movie that you can watch on Netflix. It's kind of a pilot, backdoor pilot for a series that he's working on. We talked to who else, Jay? We've talked to comic book creators. We've talked to cartoonists. One of the coolest ones. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jay. This might podcasting 101. Who was the psychologist that did the Netflix documentary about DC villains?
Oh, geez. She does a podcast called Arkham Sessions, Her name is it's escaping me right now.
I put you on the spot.
You did. I don't want to say her name wrong either, but yes, she does. She does a podcast called Arkham Sessions, and she was in that documentary. And it's a very, very intelligent look, a different type of look at Batman. She actually will study the villains and Batman himself and Bruce Wayne, and she gives theory as to why these things happen, or it's a very great show.
Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
I was just trying to look it up. Yes.
Yeah. So she actually got to come on the show and we talked to her, but she had also been asked to do a bit role in Netflix's A Necessary Evil, which is a look at all of the DC villains and break them down and how they're created and the psychology behind them. We just talked to an actor from Parallels, and all of a sudden his last name is escaping me. Why is that?
Eric Jungen.
Yeah, I always say it wrong anyway.
Yep.
We've had a lot of great guests. So the spotlights for me are probably my favorite aspect when we do get them. We've actually got an actress from Better Call Saul coming on the show soon, which is fantastic since not only does Jay do all the podcasts that the listeners have been hearing about, he also does Better Call Saul, a fan cast for the TV series. So kudos to him.
Mm-hmm. Great show, by the way. Let me ask you this, both of you. in this whole progression, the podcasting history of you two so far, it sounds like to me, and I'm not just basing this on episode counts, although that's obviously one strong supporter of this statement. It seems like all along with the previous show efforts, you guys were ultimately trying to make a 7 Days a Geek. It sounds like this was where you were kind of evolving to the whole time. Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. I mean, I never looked at it that way. I don't know if Grant would agree, but I think that, yeah, I mean, to a sense, I guess it's where I'm most comfortable at.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, on a subconscious level, I guess the way you worded that, Dan, then yeah, absolutely. Because really all we're doing is playing to our strengths and our passions outside of our normal jobs and our married life and being dads and things like that. Like this is, you take all of that out of the equation and boil us down to these two guys who just love pop culture, love cinema, comic books, and we're big on cartoons, and we're kids at heart. And so, yeah, I guess starting with podcast motion picture and then working our way through, podcasting just became a really easy medium for us to sit down. And him and I have these, I mean, you have to understand, we worked at Best Buy for a year or two together when I first moved, like I said, and we met and became friends. And then we didn't see or talk to each other for a whole year. I quit, moved on to another job, and
didn't even tell me.
Jay,
wow.
This is true. It was not a happy quitting. It was a I'm unhappy and quitting kind of leave job. So, but then I got a job working for this company, and about a year after, here comes Jay walking through the door. And it's like, Jay, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I got hired in. I'm like, are you serious? And we've worked together ever since. And every day it is, hey, did you read that article? Hey, did you see they just cast so and so? And it I don't know. It's a great thing that we get to do this, and we get to do it because we love it. You know what I mean?
And that was where my question came from when you guys were describing those conversations on the aisles in Best Buy. It sounds like this is the podcasting extension that you were trying to get to, but the first couple iterations couldn't quite hit it right. But you guys ended up with a title and a format and an approach that allowed you to bring all of that in and deliver it for 195 episodes so far.
Yeah,
absolutely. I would like to say too, for the record, 7 Days a Geek is 100% Jason's creation. This was his baby. He gave birth to it. He nurtured it. He puts in.
It was a 10-pound podcast.
He puts in the most work. He has the most passion, desire, and drive for it, and it is a great representation of who Jason is at heart. And
overclipped.
No, I don't want anyone, because you've used some verbiage that people could mistake as me having a part in that, Dan. And I don't ever want to take away anything.
That's not fair. Cause I mean, like you have a part in it in the fact that we work together and talk to each other, like you building the Stranger Conversations. Same thing. We're in the aisles. We're discussing things. I mean, I would never take credit for anything with that show, but I mean, I was certainly behind the scenes discussing things with you, and 7 Days of Geek grew the same way. Like I went to you asking you if we should talk about this or this, and 7 Days of Geek, I mean, it was built for two things. One was I really wanted a reason for my friends to come over and have conversations. I missed hanging out with them, and Grant and I, it's just, I mean, 7 Days of Geek, out of anything, is just Grant and I and our conversations, and it probably, if I have anything to say about it, it always will be. Like, I love everyone that's on the show. I never want anyone to leave. I struggle with, I have personal internal struggles, if you will, with people not showing up every week, because I really just love sitting around and seeing my friends and drinking a beer and having conversations. But at the end of the day, Grant is, we jokingly say we're married. I mean, it's like every day we are with each other, and I love the chemistry that I think that we have, and we hear from people all the time that enjoy it, and I think that's just one of my favorite things about doing this thing, and why that I love it so much is people get to share our friendship.
I agree with that. I mean, it's weird to, I guess, be talking about it on Dan's show, but yeah, I mean, Jay's my best friend. We've been together, quote unquote, for as long as we have, and I don't think anyone other than my wife and a friend from back home know me better than Jay, and so it's just a natural fit for him and I to and people love that, which is nice. Not everybody loves me. That's just the way it is on the show. My personality, my rants, what have you, but at the end of the day, people do like and do have an appreciation for Jay and I's friendship and our banter. And I think most recently, it must have been 117, right, Jay? Where we dropped for an entire episode, we didn't do any geeking out. There was no 7 Days of Geek. We put it out as a 7 Days of Geek episode. Right. It was really Jay and I just sitting down for the first time in a long time and having a conversation just about us. And it was an episode I'm really proud of, and I miss that part of our friendship.
Well, what's interesting about it is, and I was just thinking about the dichotomy here. You're absolutely right, Grant, in terms of that interplay, that relationship is something that people are going to be attracted to as a listener. I've talked about it a lot with other hosts, with a couple things, with the guys from Moving the Needle, with Neil and Annalise from Dark Angels and Pretty Freaks. That
all these shows.
Yeah, it's so common. It's the interaction between the cast members, to borrow your term there, that so many people tend to latch on to and come back week after week. However, what's interesting is Jason with Podcasting 101 and Grant with Stranger Conversations, that's not there, right? You're trying to create that right off the bat. And that's sort of the same thing I do here with my interviews on this show, is that you are trying to, within a context of, an hour for Jason and I, or 3 hours for Grant, to come up with, an interaction that works. And how do you guys contrast kind of these two old friends that know each other so well, and that magic happens every time on 7 Days of Geek, but over on your other efforts, it's a totally different game? Like, what is that contrast like for you guys?
If I can speak for you, Jay, because
please do.
Well, you often speak for me, and I thought this question might come up, and I thought,
like a puppet.
When you're talking about Podcasting 101 and Jay, and then 7 Days of Geek and Jay, there is two distinctly different personalities. They're both a part of him, but he definitely dials back, I guess, the hardcore comedy, the throw jokes at the wall and see what sticks. And he really dials in on his professional side and his natural curiosity of podcasting and the world that surrounds podcasting. I mean, I don't know if you have looked through the Podcasting 101 library, but he has had some very affluent podcasters on there.
Yes, indeed.
John Lee Dumas, Cliff Ravenscraft.
Mm-hmm. No, I haven't had him yet. There's been conversations.
Okay. But some of the other, more affluent ones. But then at the same time, he has people you've never heard of. Might not even be a blip on your radar, but when he gets them on the show, you can hear in his voice this general this interest, this energy, this desire to learn more about them and their process. And then along the way, one of the coolest things about Jay, and anyone who's listening to this that has ever considered making a podcast, he will give you every ounce of information that he's ever learned from anyone on Podcasting 101. He'll give it to you for free. You don't have to pay $19.95 for it. You don't have to buy a book.
I mean, you can, but I'll get it for free.
Right, but that's my point, is that your willingness to help. I don't know. I guess the difference between the two shows is really the way that you dial down, I guess, the wacky Jerry Lewis comedy, and you dial in on your actual passion, and you can hear that when you're interviewing people. Very similar to you, Dan. When you're talking to people, you can just hear it. It's not like you're just asking questions for the sake of asking a question and getting an answer. Like you care.
Yeah, I like to think so. And Jay, just because this will be fun, Jay, why don't you answer for Grant?
Oh, great. What am I? The original question, I remember thinking something, and then
kind of the contrast between playing upon the dynamic with both of you on 7 Days a Geek and then doing it with a guest on, in Grant's case, Stranger Conversations.
I will say that for the both of us, and we talked about this more when he was building the Stranger Conversations, was to be a little cheesy, or for lack of a better term, we are like each other's whoopies. Podcasting, we've always podcasted with each other. So going out and doing Podcasting 101, initially my idea of Podcasting 101 was basically 7 Days a Geek, interviewing podcasters because I was so passionate about it. But quickly learning, and here's the thing for podcasters who want to start podcasting, things change. Here's one of them. They weren't as interested, the cast of 7 Days a Geek, as I was. It was 7 Days a Geek. Like, there were the four of us around the table, and we would talk to them. It was always lighthearted, and there was a lot of jokes. It was a lot of fun. If you go back and listen to, between the first 20 episodes, there was quite a few episodes where they were involved too, and those were fun. They were much different than the 101. But I had to learn to be without everyone and sort of do the interviews, and there was a big growing process there, and it was scary. Grant experienced the same thing. Starting the show, he didn't know whether he was going to be able to do a podcast without me, and of course I knew he would. He's a great interview. He's a great conversationalist. I think he's very intelligent. He doesn't give himself enough credit. He beats himself up more than anyone else does. But so I knew that he would have that in him. But it was very, it was a struggle for the both of us, only because we'd done it for so long. And now that he's doing it, I think he's gotten much more comfortable. He used to do the intros to his show for a few times. He hated it so much because it is weird sitting in a room by yourself trying to talk to a microphone and entertain people. So that was the part that he left the show and went right into the interview. That's the easy part. And I think once you get talking, it becomes easier. But to be alone, I think, was a growing thing for the both of us.
Back to the Stranger Conversations, Grant. I'll ask you a question about yourself and your show. Although I appreciate you guys playing the answering for each other game. That's pretty good, I think.
Sure.
Stranger Conversations, I think, and Jason alluded to it earlier, you did a phenomenal job in the show's launch, in the sense that you sort of introduced the idea and then sort of started the promotion with the artwork, and it was almost like this great build-up. Looking back on what the beginning was like for you, and I'm not talking about the changes we've already talked about with the show, but kind of in the show's launch, its conception, its ideas moving forward, what do you think worked, and what do you think you might do different next time if you had another idea?
Geez, well, that's a pretty heady question there.
Kind of what I do.
I don't really know what worked or didn't work. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, and I any answer I give in any positive light, I feel like I'd be pretentious, or, well, I'll tell you what I enjoyed. I enjoyed marketing before I launched it by using my photography and trying to get people's attention. I'd put up a phrase or something and then throw out one of the pictures I was proud of taking. And I tried to associate my photography with the marketing of the show, because a lot of my photography is, in fact, strangers that I take pictures of with them not being aware.
No.
I use a very long lens, and What? Why is that funny?
I stand on the sidewalk down the alley. She never sees me.
No, it's just, I don't ever want the subject to be aware, because when I'm would you quit making me sound like a stalker?
I don't know that he's doing it, Grant.
Okay, listen. It's called street photography. The point is. The point is
I wish she didn't have blinds.
See, this is what he does. This is it right here. The point is to catch people in their natural environment. My God, this is ridiculous. You asked me.
I couldn't help it.
Oh, I need a diaper.
At least I got Dan to crack. Professionalism right out the window. I heard that laugh, Dan.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's all Jason's fault.
I like taking photographs of people who are unaware, because you can catch them in a moment. You can catch them in a thought. You can catch them with a specific look on their face, doing something, a mother taking care of her child, or an old man sitting on a park bench just lost in thought, and I'm always looking for that moment and you miss it. Like if you don't, it's there and then it's not. And so I like street photography. I don't let people know that I'm taking pictures of them. And the idea that I'm taking pictures of strangers kind of fell into the idea behind the stranger conversations. That there was probably a part of me that was building subconsciously, as the photography came before the idea for the podcast. And so, that's when I started building it. What didn't work? I think what didn't work is, like, I have a horrible Twitter life. I don't tweet anything. I'm not like other people for the most part, that where I have anything intelligent to say, or I don't go online and copy philosophical, witty, spiritual sayings or quirky jokes or anything like I will see someone tweet something, and if I think it's cool or funny, or it gives me some kind of emotional response, I might retweet it. But for the most part, I'm there to not only market my podcast, but I'm also there to help promote and give exposure to other podcasts. And so I do a lot of retweeting. You'll notice I don't do Follow Fridays, because I think, and while I appreciate people do it for me, it's not necessary, only because I think that what happens is, you do a Follow Friday and then you put 15 people's names in there, and then you do that for like the 90 people that you love and adore, the 1,000 people that you have in your Twitter following, and then that's all it is, just moment after moment after moment. So I try throughout the week to market and promote not only my show, but other people's show as well. The only thing that happens is that sometimes I feel like I see people doing it a lot for me, and I miss them occasionally. So I have to go back and make sure that I'm giving them the respect and the help that they're giving me. But I don't know. You tell me, Dan. You were there. Like you were.
No, what my feedback would be is I think there was a lot of people who got really excited about the concept, right? I mean, I think the concept itself stood on its own. I think it still stands on its own. I think a lot of people really like the idea that these are two people who don't know each other and they're about to change that. That concept in and of, all the other stuff is great. The photography, the artwork, the kind of build that you did before launch, and to the extent that you're able to now as well, is all great and grand. But it's that concept that I think that will always have some form of longevity to it, always have legs. And I think that in and of itself is because you can literally go anywhere with this. A conversation between two people who don't know each other could be applied in so many different ways.
I would like to say, now that you've brought that up, and that as soon as you started talking about it, I guess that's where it got away from me in the beginning. Was really the idea was it wasn't just complete strangers. I mean, even people can be strangers. For instance, and this is no joke, and everyone can just be flabbergasted by this knowledge. Until a month ago, for as long as Jason and I had been friends, never knew we went to college. Not a once. Never came up in conversation in all the years of our friendship. And that's when it struck me that, in fact, there are things about the people that you've known forever standing right next to you that you don't know. And I'll tell you why. Because they're the thinker of their thoughts. They're the ones who choose to share or keep their thoughts locked up inside. And the question is can I get those people to open up and share with me? And by doing so, exposing themselves, showing other people that they can expose themselves and, their inner thoughts, their inner monologue without fear of being judged or ridiculed. And so the one thing that kind of got away from me and people really latched onto it was complete strangers.
Right.
People I've never talked to, never seen, and I felt a bit of pressure to make sure that I do that. And in fact, it's only worked out that way out of the 20 episodes, I think maybe 4 or 5 times where it's complete. Like, okay, somebody goes, hey, I like the concept of your show. And I'm like, hey, come on my show. And that's it. I don't go back and forth on Twitter with them, nothing.
Right. But I think where I was more going there was the flexibility of the idea in and of itself. And you just shone the light on a whole nother side, right? The idea of people who don't know each other, who get to know each other, could be interpreted exactly as you did. 2 people who know each other to a degree, but get to know each other a lot better. And it can be done, and it could be man on the street. It could be people who've had previous communication. Maybe it was only electronic. This is the first time it's verbal. Maybe it's people who've known each other for years, but haven't talked in the last 5 or something. There's so many different variations in take where you could be just decreasing the level of stranger through this enterprise. So,
sure.
And that's kind of where I was getting at, that it has so much uniqueness in its approach and could be interpreted any different ways, which gives you the flexibility moving forward, I would think.
I mean, really, Dan, we're having a stranger conversation, are we not?
Aren't they all?
Oh, just blew my hair back.
That's deep. Jason, I want to bring you back in and talk about one of the things I always bring up is the idea of listener feedback. And I can imagine for many of your shows, I'm kind of curious, the best story you've got in terms of listener feedback. Is there somebody said that you had an amazing impact, or they shared something, or what was the best version of listener feedback you've received?
Grant, help me out. I'm having a brain fart.
No, you're not. What you're doing is you're keeping quiet is what you're doing.
I am.
Okay, well, are we talking about any specific podcast?
No, anyone that's just a great story.
I don't know if they're great stories. I know at one point our popularity for the last podcaster standing reached a pretty big high. I mean, I say it all the time, regardless of the fact that I basically killed the show and moved on from it. It was lightning in a bottle. It was one of those podcasts that, because of the cast itself, maybe not subject matter, but the cast itself could have went really far. But we hit this pinnacle of popularity amongst our listeners, and we would get some interesting mail. I guess it was Jay, are you going to bail me out here now that I've dug a hole? Or?
Are you? Why? I wasn't going to go there. Yeah, we got interesting mail.
Well, thanks for sharing.
That's exactly what we said.
Yeah. Jay and I are both happily married with children, and so we got mail that we basically had to say, please don't send us any more of this mail because that's just not us.
You had passionate female fans.
I would say that is a good description.
There you go.
But I'll tell you, for being just young and I guess being in a podcasting environment, getting that kind of stuff, it was like, are you kidding me? Like, we're not really doing anything.
It was strange, yeah. Some of the other things we've gotten. I mean, we've heard word from people who are going through divorces, and our shows, a number of them, for whatever reason, it had helped entertain them and get them through it. We've got a listener who works behind the scenes now on 7 Days a Geek on the Facebook page, Thomas Jr. Jackson, who had a kidney replacement and had come along, found our show really early on. And he listened to us all through his, trying to get healthy again. And he'd written to us and told us about, how we were there to, make him happy when he wasn't. We've gotten a lot of good and, and not always, it's not always those things that I find are good. It's just anyone who takes the time to to listen to us for any number of hours or days, or they marathon us, or they hear us talk about TLPS, they decide to go back and listen to them. I mean, there are so many podcasts out there, and there are so many people in our circle who listen to a ton of podcasts. And for them to take any time out of their day to listen to us weirdos in Michigan just be geeks and talk things, I mean, sure, we have that in common, but I mean, it's so appreciated.
Before we go, Jason, we mentioned your Better Call Saul podcast as well, and then you've got another one, I believe, correct?
Oh, dear God, do I?
Participated in Gotham Knights.
Right. What am I thinking of? With the dad?
Oh,
yeah. There's not a podcast yet. I do a dad blog called Deconstructing Dad.
It was a blog, and I thought I heard you say once somewhere that it may turn into a podcast, or maybe
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Well,
Jay has hundreds of ideas for podcasts. Jay would do a different podcast every day if he could. Do 2 a day.
It's in the plans.
Gosh.
There you go.
I thought I'd heard reference. So what's the story with the Better Call Saul right now? Are we on hiatus, I take it?
Yeah, we're on hiatus because the show is on hiatus. I didn't want to continue what am I going to do? Go back to Breaking Bad and watch episodes with Saul and talk about it? I wanted to keep it strictly that show.
So I just gave somebody an idea.
I was going to say, you had thought of that, though, hadn't you?
Oh, yeah. And when I looked into it, there were a lot of people who had started their Better Call Saul podcast with past episodes leading into the pilot episode and then the series itself. I kept mine strictly to the show. I think we did a pre-episode talking about, introducing who I was and who Nico was, because I figured there was a lot of people that are going to listen to that show that probably never heard of any of our podcasts before, only because people on iTunes will be searching for, this hit TV show. So, we introduced ourselves and talked about what we liked about Breaking Bad and went right into the show. And there was 10 episodes of the series. So there's 11 or 12 total. But yeah, I wanted to keep it strictly that. And I'm going crazy. Like, I'm waiting for that show to come back so we can talk about it again, because it was literally like I've done fan casts before. I did one for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We did Gotham, and to varying degrees of success. But Better Call Saul was, I knew it was something that, lack of a better term, I was going to geek out about. I think Breaking Bad was one of the greatest shows that's ever been written, that's been directed. It is almost a flawless TV show on every avenue of creation. And they went out on a high note, and I knew Better Call Saul was just going to pick up with that, and I didn't want to absorb 7 days of Geek into that, so I decided just to keep that separate. And I absolutely love that show.
It's a great show, both of them. I did not catch Breaking Bad while its initial run, but when I did start it on Netflix, I consumed, what was it? How many seasons? 5, 6?
Yes.
All in I think 2 weekends. I did the whole thing and literally holed up in my basement watching that. And then I was there on debut night for Better Call Saul. So I'm with you on that one. You mentioned, having that show in previous fan casts, and that's going to lead me into sort of the future for either of you gentlemen with your current shows, with future show ideas, not to divulge any secrets or anything, but what's the future for you two in podcasting?
Go ahead, Jay.
Well, it depends on how much time I can find.
Right.
Yeah, and Grant's not lying. Like, I'm looking at a notebook right now for just my Monkey Poo Studios page, and I've got 6-7 ideas of different podcasts I want to do. One of them, it's not really a secret, is the Action 7 Weekly World News radio play we did a few months back. I always wanted it to continue on. I think that'll end up, it's like a Marvel parody told by like the nightly news, whether, what happened in the Marvel universe. So, it's gimmicky, it's funny, it's a parody. They're about 10-minute episodes. I'm working on creating a season now, plotting that out and writing it. And Grant is one of the news anchors, and then we just found a listener who did the female news anchor, and we got a couple of listeners who are going to help me write segments, and hopefully we can roll that series out. And that's something that I can maintain because they're only 10-minute episodes. So we'll go and record it. I add a couple of sound effects, the news drops and whatnot, and then we'll release that and see if that gets devoured or not.
All right. And Grant, for you?
For me right now, my sole focus is the Stranger Conversations, growing that into a better podcast, using that to grow me into a better person, and using that into helping other people grow into being better people. I don't really have any future plans for podcasting. To be honest with you, and any one of our regular listeners, our fans know, I ride Jason's coattails. I go where he asks me to go, and I most of the time will do whatever he asks me to do. So whatever thing he's concocted for the day, I'm on board with, and we ride it out until he comes up with something else, and we'll try that. I mean, really, he's just, what people need to understand is he is a creative hurricane. He literally couldn't just do, and this has been actually a point of contention between him and I, he literally can't do just 7 Days a Geek. He has to have 3 or 4 things going, and that holds off the other 100 ideas that he has, at bay. Because if any one of those drops, he's got another one to fill its place. He just needs to be a creative and artistic person, and he's very good at that. And I'm comfortable, for lack of a better term, being his sidekick, going along with him for the ride. So with the Stranger Conversations, it's growing it into a better show. I bet you I've got another 20 episodes where it's going to evolve and change a little bit. I'm getting ready to spend an entire weekend with a massive amount of podcasters I respect, and I'm elated to meet in person finally. And I hope that I can, learn something from them and the experiences that we're going to have that weekend. And I'm getting ready to try, like I said earlier, the man on the street. I'm hoping that I will have the courage, and I will have the.
Do you want to practice with me?
Yeah, right.
I was going to lead into, when is Jason going to be on Stranger Conversations question.
We've bounced back and forth with that. One of the trappings that the show is falling into right now is, here's the thing. If I wasn't on Twitter, nobody would know I existed. And that's the simple fact. My show lives and breathes because of the fact that I'm on Twitter, or that people pass my name around on Twitter. I'm not good at social media. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not comfortable with Facebook. I'm not a marketing machine. I'm not very good or adept at that. I don't. Jason told me the other day, you've got so many podcasters on your show. Now, obviously, I stated this in episode 0 with, which was known as the Stranger Origins. It's actually where I discussed with Neil from Dark Angel, Pretty Freaks Drink, what my hopes for the show. If you start with episode 0, you'll hear, a lot of this and what I was hoping for. And you, of course, if you move ahead, you'll hear how it's changed a little bit from the initial idea. And then, of course, about halfway through, Neil and I actually have a Stranger Conversation because we were strangers. And I don't know where I was going with that.
So Jason's not planning on being on the show right now.
He's not, because he wants me to get away from other podcasters.
I was going to bring that up at one point, because it's most, maybe all of the library so far is other podcasters.
Yeah, nope. There's been, I think, 2 or 3 people in there that have not been podcasters, or like Paul Meyer. He had only podcasted once or twice.
Right.
He was spanking new, but
I do remember a couple now that either was their first time ever on a podcast, and I do remember a few of those.
Gareth Hayward out of New Zealand, never been on a podcast in his life. It's this is how I find people. I guess that's where my train of thought was. I find people through Twitter, and most of the people in my social circles are podcasters. But everyone knows, as discussed in episode 0, that my show isn't a platform for you to come on and promote your show. It's not there for you to promote your the thing that you're out there doing, and that's making it's you. There's a section at the very end where I say, hey, tell everybody about your creative endeavors, and of course when they speak on that, I'll pull a little bit more out of them if they don't give enough, or they don't want to, or whatever. But for the most part, I think I've done a good job, in spite of the fact that everyone's been a podcaster, to get to know the person, the human being.
Right.
But I think Jay has a point that at some point I'm going to have to just willy-nilly pick somebody.
Here's what I'll say, Grant. Anyone listening to this show right now that's not a podcaster, that's willing to have a conversation with Grant recorded, reach out to him and see what happens.
And to answer your question, we've talked about it a lot. We talked about me coming on and doing like little segments or like reviewing certain aspects of his show, and we'll have conversations about that. We've talked about actually me just being the stranger conversation, because he is always learning something about me. I am learning something about him. But we talk so much that sometimes we're like, well, we're going to get on mic and what are we going to have to say? So, and I want him to I love his show. I love listening to it. And if I'm on it, then that's a week that I don't get to listen to it. No.
I don't want to have Jay on the show unless it's like an episode where I can just completely Baba Walters him and have him break down.
You said it like Baba Walters.
Yeah, you even got the whole accent in there and everything.
Purpose. I'm just saying, what's the point of having Jay on the show if I can't get him to just crack?
Like I want to be on a show, but at the same time, I mean, people listen to the two of us all the time.
Right.
That's
to go on his show he said people have asked, I think that they're nuts. I mean, do they need another hour, 5 hours of Grant not talking? I don't know.
Well, to be seen. And folks, I hope that you're subscribing to all these shows that we're talking about just to see if this ever happens in terms of Jason being involved with Stranger Conversations, or if or how, or, maybe there's a creative way of pulling that off. But Grant, you brought it up, so I'll throw it to you first. Where can they find all of your creative endeavors online?
They can find me on Twitter at Insta_Grants2. That is, I guess, a personal Twitter feed. They can find the official show feed at The Stranger Cons. They can also find me now reliving my glory days on Instagram at The Stranger Conversations.
What?
You didn't know I went back on Instagram?
No.
Now you're learning something. So
yeah, you can just type in The Stranger Conversations on Instagram. You can send me emails, thestrangerconversations@gmail.com. And of course, my website, which is really just a Libsyn feed, thestrangerconversations.com.
And Jason, for you.
You want the abridged version or the unabridged version?
Give me anything you like.
The best place to find me is on Twitter. I live there. It's S7, the number 7, EVEN Days of Geek. So it's 7 with the 7 after the S. S7 EVEN Days of Geek. 7daysofgeek.net, the number 7daysofgeek.net, or monkeypoostudios.com, I believe, is up now. That is like a portal to everything that I do. Podcasting101.net is now up. And really just, if you're on the interwebs, you can find me any of those places.
Well, I'll have all of this linked up in the show notes as well, folks. So if you have trouble finding any of this, check on your app of choice or at the podcastdigest.info for this episode and all the show notes there. Jason and Grant, thank you guys both so much for taking your time to join me here and talk about all the great work that you guys are doing. Each one of these shows could have been its own show. I feel kind of like I've cheated the system a little bit trying to jam all of this into an episode, but hopefully a few more people will find out about all of the excellent work that you guys are doing. I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having us on. It was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And folks, that'll do it for this week here on the Podcast Digest. My name is Dan Lizette, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.